Bonjour à toutes et à tous, bienvenue à ce webinaire. Nous sommes très heureux de vous accueillir. C'est un webinaire qui s'organise dans le cadre d'un colloque qui s'appelle Discover Our Europe.
Started on Wednesday and finishing today with this webinar. Discover Our Europe is a European project co-financed by the project Europe for Citizens with 8 partners from 7 European countries. We partners with the same ambition to go beyond the concept we normally have on Europe, whilst giving the possibility to European citizens to acquire new knowledge about the European Union. We are 8 partners in 7 countries. We have the Fondation de Savoir from Hungary, the DRP DNM in Slovenia, CISIA in Romania, but also PGEA in Cyprus, Sovogem in Portugal, and Cyber Voluntarios in Madrid, Spain, and Eurocircle from Marseille, France. The first workshop has been done in Pietrania in Romania. We have today this event in France, and on the 7th of June will be in Hungary online, and it will also be translated in English, so you'll be able to connect to that one as well. So this is all for the presentation. I'd like to thank today Mr. Alain DUMORT to be with us for this conference. You are head of the European Commission Regional Representation in France, in Marseille, and you will speak today about the European Green Deal. The floor is yours. With a great pleasure. Thank you very much, Claire, and welcome to all our European friends. It is a real pleasure to be able to talk to you and to see you, even though it has to be done remotely for the moment. But thanks to the new technologies, we have this wonderful opportunity whilst we wait to be able to meet physically once again. The topic for today is the famous Green Deal that I will be introducing without any document to use, because Claire will be sharing with you a huge document that is filled with figures and detailed explanation. I'd like for the moment to talk directly and to give more space to questions and answers, point of views, criticism as well. Why not? Because it can be done on this project that is the Green Deal. To go directly at the heart of the topic, for us, the Green Deal is the priority amongst priorities. Of course, there are several, but this one you'll see that is beyond the health emergency that has disrupted our society for now a year and a half. The main topic for Europe at the horizon 2030 and even 2050 is fighting against climate change. On this angle, we have qualified a series of ambitious proposals under the label Green Deal. The Green Deal is, first of all, to give ourselves some ambitious objectives, but manageable. We know quite well that all the nations in the world failed in the past with a series of agreements. I'm talking about Kyoto's agreement, defining strict rules to reduce greenhouse gases. Many countries have not respected this in the 90s, and it has been a failure. Also, the agreements in Paris some years ago, results are not attained for several reasons, but it didn't work. We cannot continue to go on like that because the climate started changing. Climate change is a reality, especially when we look at the melting ice. I'm talking. I'm asking our friends from Slovenia, and I suppose they can see it every day in the glaciers. But there is not also climate change. I'm talking about Vermont. There has been a real catastrophe in the agriculture sector some weeks ago, with some ice that destroyed most of the crops. Then we have flooding, of course. There are heavy rains starting next week. We have droughts as well. And so you understand that climate is changing and we need to take care of that. So after a lot of studies, we realized that we have to stop this, or at least to slow this down, and a way to do it is to reduce greenhouse gases to these gases are useful to avoid the cooling of of Earth. Well, I don't want to get too complicated, but there is a lot of work to do when we talk about greenhouse gases. To be quite simple, we are talking about CO2. If we keep that in mind, it is essential. There are other gases as well, but there is also small particles that are produced especially by diesel motors. But the target that we have is to be carbon neutral in the future. This concretely means that Europe must be eliminate as much as CO2 as it produces. We are not that far because we are quite far, sorry, because 3/4 of the CO2 produced is stored in the atmosphere because of human and industrial activity. So 2050, we must be carbon neutral with some milestones to get there, and especially in 2030, a recent agreement of the ministries of the European Parliament said that we have to reduce at least by 55% CO2 emissions by 2030. So 2030, we are in 2021, so it's just around the corner. How can we get there? We are talking about a real revolution that needs to be carried out, needs to be done, and the means that have to be implemented. The risk would be to set ourselves some targets that are not attainable, and we will have a problem with that. We will have a credibility problem towards the citizen, saying that Europe promises things that makes promises, sorry, that cannot be fulfilled. And at that point, we won't be able to do it. And the second problem will be a real disruption of climate with the dramatic consequences, either on in several geographies. I'm talking about coastlines that will disappear, the melting of the ice, entire zones, entire islands in the Pacific that would disappear, submerged by the waters. So this is a reality. Before, it was something that only environmentalists would talk about, and now it is everybody's talking about it and everybody's concerned about this. To get to this target, which is ambitious but in paramount, nevertheless, we need to have the means of our policy. And the first competence is legislation. We have seen in the past several examples that if there is no laws implemented, agreements tend not to be respected. We cannot rely simply on the good faith of companies, enterprises, and so on and so forth, because, as I said previously, this transition must be done through really deep changes in our society, in our way of doing things. So the states have to support this. Talking about legislation, things are moving because 3 weeks ago, the European Parliament, whether the Council and the Commission, they agreed on a project of law. This will be clear for many French people because climate rules, climate laws have been adopted by the National Assembly some days ago in France. It is a form of declination of these laws, but it is quite evident that even in a country like France or Germany, or in all countries throughout Europe, this will not be the solution because we need to move forward all together. When we talk about globalization, climate change is a problem of globalization, and I dare say that is quite the most evident examples of the globalization, and the solution of this must be found altogether and implemented altogether beyond the borders of Europe, because even if Europe could have fantastic results, if our neighbors, especially India, China, African countries, wouldn't follow on a global scale, we would not attain the result. Everybody must start to clean one's own house and garden, but then we need to agree on an international level to move all forward together. And this is what we do when European question in all European topics in question, we talk on an international level, and we've been helped with Joe Biden and its new administration in USA. As you know, is radically opposed and to the way of doing things of his predecessor. And climate change is an important topic for him and his government. It is an important decision in a country where, as you may know, the energy consumption is not a problem because energy is quite cheap in terms of fuel, electricity, oil, gas, all of this. But anyway, it has been done, and all countries, included China, that sees an interest, because China, as India, suffers from climate change in its metropolis, but also in its industries. So it is quite, it pays a great deal of attention to climate change and all linked topics. This is the legislation part, which is important. But even though there is a law, you need to abide by it and you need to respect it. And so the another important point is the funding. And the package is quite important, is the most important throughout the European Union history, because we will mobilize up until 2030 1,000 billion euro. You understand that it's an enormous sum, and we're talking about public money and private money that will be invested. One example, we have adopted a budget up until 2027, which is of 1,076 billion euro. We have decided that a quarter of this budget, 270 billion, would be used solely for the fight to climate change. There is a second chapter in this multi-annual strategy, is the relaunch plan. about the post-COVID environment. As you know, pandemic has struck deeply into the economy of all those states, and we are looking into solution to relaunch economy after several economical failures and furloughs and so on and so forth. The plan is 750 billion euro, quite important, and this will be used over 3 years, not on 7 years like the European budget. 30% of this 750 billion will be focused and used solely against climate change. So public money, as you can say, if we add these two figures, it becomes quite important. We have more than half of the 1,000 billion that I talked about coming from European money. To that, we'll have to add national funding. I will talk about the examples that I know best. The French example, the relaunch plan for France, it's 100 billion. On these 100 billion, 40 billion come from European fund. Within this, France has decided that more than 35% of these would go towards the climatic transition, environmental transition. So that all is to say that it's really a serious matter because we have a framework of laws which will be quite strict to reduce the greenhouse gases. But then, we need a lot of money in order to do this. So where is this money going to go to? If we look at where problems come from in terms of greenhouse gas, there are two main problem. The first one is transport. When I'm saying that the first one I'm not saying that is the most important in terms of volume, but it's the first because it's the most complex to manage, because we are all, you, me, everybody, we are all producers of these gases. We pollute, which is not the case of a great industry that can pollute a lot, but we know that if we convert this industry, the problem is quite easily solved. When I say easily, of course, I'm talking in respect to transport, because in transport you have thousands and thousands of stakeholders. And so the conversion of the transport sector, which uses thermal and fossil energy, cannot be done in a day or with a magic wand. So there is a lot of work to do, and this work will be to organize the end of thermal propulsion, thermal motors, and you see that yes, well, why not? Why not? This is already happening. As I'm sure that in your countries you see a lot of examples of advertisements of electric motors and cars and so on and so forth. But it will not be that simple, because all European citizens do not have the means to buy, even if we are talking in 5 to 10 years, to sell their car and buy an electric car. So of course we'll need to support them. I'm talking, as you might know, many cities will become more strict in terms of using thermal motors in the main cities. So these kind of vehicles will be forbidden to circulate into the cities, and people will be under obligation to change their car. But when you have a normal revenue, you are not in a position to change your vehicle and to buy an electric one, because they are quite expensive. So we need to support people to change, to go through this change. I'll give an example. A car, an electric car goes over 20,000 euro. Even if the state gives you 5,000, you have to spend 15,000 euro. So is not easy for everybody. And we need to find socially acceptable objectives. And in France, in particular, we always have a problem of social acceptance of measures to be implemented. For instance, taxes that have led to demonstration in France, and so on and so forth. It is an example.
Then another example, 40% of greenhouse gas comes from the energy consumption in my house, in your house, in public buildings. And once again, the market is really much diversified, segmented, so you can't change overnight. You can't change thousands and millions of buildings. And okay, you can fix some norms in terms of pollution, but you also need to implement some supporting systems at all levels, especially within the recovery plan, to accelerate the conversion of boilers and by setting, for example, obligations and parameters for boilers and heating systems. In other countries, for example, in Germany, but also Poland, the biggest share of energy production comes from carbon. The sector of energy production is by far the biggest producer of gas. And for example, Germany has given up nuclear power stations, but they will need to find an alternative because they can't rely on the carbon to replace the other forms of nuclear power stations. For Germany, it is not a problem, but for Poland, it is going to become a big problem because they're going to use very much polluting energy sources. So the scope of the challenge that we have to take up really need to have some financial packages, and this Green New Deal is also a social deal, because a part of the population will be able to to benefit from the grants, the advantages. For example, one of the benefits is that the cities will be cleaner, and we need to make sure that all people can benefit from that. And then you need to bear in mind that industries have played their role, that is to make profit, but you need to be careful. We need to make sure that those industries remain in Europe. It is not good if they outsource their production in countries where the regulations are less binding than in Europe. That is why there is a big problem. So the approach can be really much local, very much focusing on climate, but then this is very much intertwined with many other social issues. The European model is not very much focusing on competition. Its main pillar is the social sphere. And this is what makes us different from other economic models. So that is the philosophy of the Green Deal, European Green Deal about climate. We need to be careful. We are very much aware and we are very much determined to implement these policies as quick as possible. And then to finish my presentation, because I would like to give you the time, the opportunity to ask questions. Another thing that I would like to tell you, previous programs in previous programs, the green, in comparison for them, the Green Deal is cross-cutting because out of 174 billion, 20% will be used for research. The program is called Horizon Europe. And then there is the LIFE program that is the only program totally focusing on the environment, but there are other programs, for example, the Regional Development Fund, the European Social Fund. A big share of this program will be devoted for the training of workers in the framework of clean energies. We know that in Europe there is a big deficit in the training of some sectors. There are also shortcomings in some forms of some kinds of production. For example, solar panel. We rely a lot on China, and there is no professional staff that can do this kind of having this kind of skills. So the Green Deal is cross-cutting because it is very much connected to many other different topics. Claire, I don't know if I can stop here and I can just wait and reply to questions in case there are already some questions. Gauthier, do we have questions? First of all, I would like to say hello. I've had a connection problem at the beginning, but I would like to seize the opportunity to thank you for accepting our invitation. We have some questions about the main causes of climate change, global warming, because greenhouse gases are not this is not the only cause of global warming. Thanks a lot for this question, because it is really important. It was very much discussed. It's all including from a more political viewpoint, because it was said that the cost to fight against climate change is going to be higher than the cost of climate change itself. So it is really hard to strike a balance. Well, there are so many causes, very many causes. Some of them, part of the causes are natural, because there are some huge volcanic eruptions, so producing lots and lots of tons of carbon dioxide. But over the last few years, about 100 years, more or less, because this is the period that we have data about. Well, so in the last 100 years, we know that the biggest cause was human activity, because the beginning of the 20th century was really the worst period, because industrialization came using energy in the worst way ever, because lots and lots of waste were produced and so on and so forth. So it is not me saying it. There are many studies at international level, and they agree on the fact that human activity is very much responsible, is one of the biggest cause of global warming. I mentioned transport, but I should also mention industry and the production of energy, electricity. I spoke about this, speaking about Poland and Germany producing energy out of carbon. I could also mention the United States. As you know, they exploit gas, but they use other forms, another source of energy, not really coal. So there are some other sources of energy. We can call them white forms of energy, for example, dams. And then there is the nuclear program. Of course, that would be another kettle of fish. We should speak about another problem, because nuclear power doesn't produce so many greenhouse gases, but it creates other problems that should be solved in the next years, because there are lots and lots of nuclear waste, and we do not know exactly how to deal with that nuclear waste. Then, of course, there are some green energy sources, but the development plan is problematic. Technically, it is feasible, but the problem lies in the fact that we do not know exactly how to develop these production centers. When we speak about renewable energy sources, there is quite a lot of decentralization, because this problem is not, we do not have this problem for coal, for oil, while for green energy sources, there is a complete decentralized production. And then there is another problem connected with wind power. Wind power is becoming very, very much efficient. In Europe is going to become the leader in this sector. But the problem is that there are some problems in accepting wind power in terms of landscape, turbines, and also because of the noise produced by those turbines. And also there are also problems of birds, because birds can be annoyed. They have problems because of wind turbines, especially some kind of birds, migrant birds, that can be bothered by the noise produced by wind power. And then there is sun power, solar power, but you need to cover a lot big surfaces. It is a big problem. You know that electronuclear power stations are becoming older and older, and in France there is a big debate about that. Should we renew our electronuclear power stations? Germany decided to give up. France has decided to extend the life of electronuclear power stations, and this could also entail some risks. Citizens are a bit hesitant vis-a-vis nuclear power stations. So there should be a discussion about that, because there is no silver bullet. Many different factors should be taken into consideration. I spoke about transport because I think that it is most passionating field, and it is the most relevant for us, because each and every one of us can be a part of the solution to this problem. Well, first of all, one of the solutions is to use the bike, to go by bike, but it really depends on where you live. I think that as a strategic axe or pillar for us as Europeans is to help to finance alternative means of transport to individual private car. For example, tramways. Some tramways lines should be financed. In France, there are 27 metropolis, out of which 19 received European funds to invest in tramways. I come from Marseille, for example. In the 50s, tramways were already there, but they were eliminated in the now 20 years ago. It was decided that they should be used again. And then another pillar that is connected to a call for proposal that is open now in France is about bike lanes creation. So we do not want to have dirty cars in center, but what are the alternatives to that? First of all, one alternative is public transport, tramways, for example, or electric buses. It depends also on the size of the city or town. But then another solution is to create bike lanes. Sometimes you do not need to have such a lot of technologies. You can just create also sharing, a service sharing, a car sharing service, or just hitchhiking. In the past, it was simply called hitchhiking. That was already a form of car sharing, sort of car sharing. It was already a solution back then. So in Germany, for example, there are many kinds of sharing. You can have car sharing, bike sharing, but the big challenge, actually, there are two challenges. On the one hand, and in an industrial challenge, the electric vehicle. Electricity is everywhere, including in, in all types of means of transport on scooters. When you're speaking about private electric vehicle, well, there is the problem of battery. This is one of the weakest points in Europe, because we do not produce batteries for electric vehicles. They are all produced in China or in Korea, in South Korea, not in North Korea, because they do other things in North Korea. So they are the biggest producers of batteries for electric vehicles. So we do not have this industrial skill. To make things even worse, we do not even have the infrastructure to recycle those batteries. And it means that by using those batteries, we degrade, we damage the environment when we have thousands and thousands of batteries that you do not know how to manage. You know that those batteries are manufactured using rare earths, and you know that they have a really bad impact on the environment. And it is a problem that we should face. That is the first pillar, the circular economy for batteries. And then a second pillar, we are speaking about Target 2020. We know that electricity, that there is a transition phase. At the moment, a hybrid car doesn't make a lot of sense, because it means that you have two problems. For example, now there is quite a lot of debate about hydrogen. There are some trains that are fueled by hydrogen, but this hydrogen is almost totally dirty because it comes from fossil fuels. And it means that we didn't solve the problem. The problem is not solved, because if you produce hydrogen and you damage the environment, the impact is negative overall. So it means that we need to find a way to produce hydrogen using only clean energy sources. It means that we need to create an alliance, a partnership among the different industries to relaunch this energy for the future that is sustainable and might be good for the environment. That is what I could tell you about these really passionate topics.
Vis-à-vis de la question qui était suivante dans l'ordre, je pense que vous avez dans votre
Thank you
exposé,
very much for that. I think that talking about for electric transport, it is good, but we need to be sure of the origin of the electricity. Another question by Mr. Dicunier, saying that in the past, agriculture was the main budget of in the budget of the European Union. So what is forecasted for agriculture in the Green Deal. Yes, I've started talking about the climate in the Green Deal, but there is not the only thing in the Green Deal. There is also a notion of circular economy, which is to minimize the impact on natural resources, be sure to recycle and repair where possible. So a number of directives that will be put in place in order to promote we have carried out intensive tests in order to reduce, for instance, plastic. Talking about, for instance, plastic straws, plastic single-use element that show that these are 80% of the waste that we found in landfills and that are and they finish in the sea in the end. So this is the second pillar, which is fundamental. And thank you very much for the question. Really interesting question. A strong pillar of the Green Deal is called From Farm to Fork, to change, to disrupt the older process and developed an alimentary production and consumption which is more respectful for the people and the environment. For the environment means to reduce the use of pesticides. We will need to find alternative ways, and we are most of the time talking about glyphosate, which is quite cheap and used a lot. And there is a massive support that we want to give to organic agriculture, which, as you know, do not use pesticide and implements alternative ways of production. This, of course, will say that we'll need to compensate financially what is lost for the farmers when they transition from traditional agriculture to an organic one. For a farmer, that means in between 20 to 30% less of yield of their crop, with a higher cost of the work, a higher mechanization in a sector where most farmers gain less than €1,000 per month underneath the minimum salary, minimum wage, at least for France. So the CAP, which is an important part of the European budget, even though it has been diminished, it has been decreased quite a lot since the creation of the European Union. The agriculture budget still is a third of the total budget, but it is directly impacted by the Green Deal because we have increased significantly the funding for farmers working in organic. We try to fund the transition. And of course, when we are talking about funding, we do not want to have funds that intervene 4 years after the transition. We need to help farmers whilst they operate this transition with several measures to support them and to support rural development, because we need to organize around the new parameters in the respect of the landscape, the biodiversity, and the environment. I am talking there, for instance, about the creation or recreation of natural areas which disappeared in order to produce more crop. As you may know, it is really expensive and quite rare for a farmer to have an insurance against climate risks. Less than a third of agriculture worker have this kind of coverage of protection. Now, I talked previously about the catastrophe that happened in France recently, and many of our farmers are not insured. Why are they not insured? Because insurance are too expensive. Because it also, to be insured, also required a reference period, a period without any kind of environmental catastrophe. But this is not possible nowadays, because each year we have a catastrophe, and each year farmers have to find new ways. You've seen maybe pictures of farmers lighting fires in between the vineyards to avoid the ice. This year, I've heard of farmers hiring helicopters to air their crop. So we have to push farmers on the one hand to equip themselves to transition to organic agriculture, but at the same time we have to support them for measures like insurance, because this will become an important criteria in the future. But if the market stays as it is, there will be less and less farmers that will be insured, because it is a vicious circle that insurance are really expensive, and there are a lot of catastrophe each year. So this is more or less the trend, but agriculture is still one of the main pillars in Europe. As I said, a third of the total budget, and still increasing year after year. And a lot of measures to conversion, a lot more of elasticity in the criteria to receive the funding. We want to simplify it further, especially with some advanced measures on funds that it was difficult to have, because any farmer, they just want to carry on working and create quality produce. So sometimes they need an advance and just to start, or after a difficult moment, and that will give them the means to continue to work. I think that as you all know, the CAP is quite paramount, because seven farmers on 10 use it. So without it, there's no viable agriculture. But that's the same in the States, for instance. That's exactly the same case in the States, without all the environmental consideration we have in Europe for the moment. Thank you very much for this explanation. Let's have an international question coming from Slovenia, saying, how does the EU plan to convince the companies and countries that do not wish to comply with the new Green Deal? It's a really good question. There are several measures. Either we can oblige them, we can make it compulsory. There are criteria on the market that either implements that either means that produce is forbidden to access a certain market, or it's more expensive. There is a difference in between Europe and countries outside Europe. We want in Europe to create a tax for a border tax for carbon. To avoid environmental dumping, and it's called, which means that since Europeans have high production constraints, we will start importing produce coming from India, coming from China. They do not have the same framework for environmental protection, thus they have cheaper products. But this is not just, this is not fair. So the principle of the European Union will be to create a tax on the outside border of Europe for all produce going over a certain threshold of carbon print. This is quite complicated because we need to know how to measure all this, of course, especially in terms of investment. That's why we carried out a lot of work on a European level on taxes in order to define what do we mean when we say a green investment, what is green, what is not, and how do we measure it? With, of course, precise measures to assess what a less polluting energy is, because we all agree that coal is the most polluting source of energy, but there is also fuel, there are others, and there is then a gas. Gas is less polluting than all the others, but it's not a green energy, not a totally renewable energy. It is still a fossil energy. So there is a lot of work that is carried out to agree on a world level to classify what kind of product is produced starting from what energy or using what energy. And this is fundamental because without this we'll be lost. There is a trend, we say that in English is greenwashing. So you repaint in green what is dirty underneath, and we do not agree to that. What we want is that produce and products coming from tier countries, they'll have to have a certain carbon print in order to enter Europe. Either they won't be able to enter and they will be forbidden for consumption. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about intermediary product, and these intermediary products will be taxed because their carbon print is too heavy, and they will be more expensive on the market. Therefore, that is a problem in the European Union because, as you know, we have a common market, we have no borders. So the main measure that we implement are measures of support and to accompany the companies. As you know, there is a fund allowing for a transition to greener, cleaner energy with about 20 billion euro for this transition. It's called the Fair Transition Fund. We are talking about 20 billion of European money. France will receive 1 billion, which also means that France do not need that much of an effort, or at least less than other countries. In the south of France, for instance, we have several centers that work in the transition of a central, which is in Gardanne, that is still using coal. What does that mean? That we'll have to convince the industry to use other energy sources instead of coal. So when you are outside Europe, you'll be taxed, and when you are inside Europe, you are supported for an energy transition. You understand from there that it's better to be in Europe than outside. Yes, I have a question on following up on this. How do we do for products that are not produced in Europe and they are not green? we cannot tax products that we do not produce because we need them. No, we will tax them. We will implement this carbon tax that can go up to 10, 20, 30% of the value of the merchandise, as any kind of border tax. It is a fight because we've we've often attacked, saying this is protectionism. And it's not, because a product coming from China, India, or wherever, if it's clean, it will enter Europe without any kind of tax. But if instead it's a product that has gone through a complicated chemical or industrial process that produces a lot of pollution, it will be taxed. And I will not talk. I don't want to talk brands here, but if you want to, for instance, buy a a car, you will be, if you want a four-wheel drive, you'll have a malus, you'll have a tax to pay on this that amounts of to at least 30-40% of the value of the car. And this is made in Korea. Either you can say, either they stay as they are, the company producing this four-wheel drive car. It's a small budget car, but the carbon tax will be so heavy on this that you will get to, in order to buy it, you will get to the same price of a premium car. So you understand that is absurd. Nobody's going to buy that car. So our industrial partners in Japan, Korea, or China, what will be the solution for them? It will be to change their means of production and to have greener production. For instance, cars from USA, American cars, they are well renowned to be really powerful, really heavy and big and huge. Now, in the USA, there are a lot of electric cars, or at least hybrid cars, allowing you to go 40 kilometers with the electricity. It is a progress, nevertheless, because in respect to the previous vehicles, it is already better. And so you see that this is an instigation to the industry to change. Industry will probably not change for the sake of environment, but they will change for the sake of their money. I've seen that the person thanked you in the chat room for the answer. We were on more of a global aspect. Let's move to the local aspect right now. What can we propose to help the communities to develop green means of transport? It is really simple, because that depends on the competences. It depends if its responsibility is on the metropolis, on the community, or whatever. But the fund that we implement is the regional development structural fund that all the countries receive, in France as others. And within this program, there are two main objectives: the Green Deal and everything innovation, not only technical innovation, but social and financial innovation as well. So bicycle lanes is part of these operational programs within this important fund of regional development. For France, as for other countries, these are funds that are given. So there is not a competition amongst the different countries like we could have in research program or life program, which are centrally managed. Here, there's a delegation of the decentralization of the European budget that pays to the country. And for instance, in France, the authority to manage the European funds are the region. So, for instance, my region, Provence-Cap d'Azur, it manages at least 1 billion of European fund. It can be a lender for Germany. It can be a region, a town, a city, whatever. There's a there is different choices. But for instance, in following the several objectives that are decided together with the European Union, there's a tender because it's European money, so it must be, it must comply to the strategic targets and objectives of the European Union. But then it's managed and implemented by the region. For instance, bicycle lanes, tramways, and so on and so forth are organized by the region. I'm thinking, for instance, for France, to regions in the Caribbean, in our ancient colonies like Reunion Island or Mayotte Island. There is a problem for everything that is digital. For instance, we need to install fiber optics and so on and so forth. So that will be the priority for them. In the mainland, in the continent, these solutions have already been implemented, so digital is not that much of a problem. So we will focus more on bicycle lanes, alternative mobility, and so on and so forth.
Pour la réponse.
Thanks a lot for your reply. I am going to switch the topic. Let's speak about agriculture again. We've talked about a smart grid, local production. How is it possible to create a local organization to have the energy mix with the support of the EU? It might seem paradoxical, but speaking about circularity, circular economy, this is exactly what we would like to develop. And this will be done in different ways. I've already spoken about grants, financial support. I have mentioned, for example, the European Regional Development Fund, the ERDF, for bike lanes, for example. But then there is agricultural common policy. And this is very much connected with direct grants for agriculturals. Then there is the European Regional Development Fund that is connected to the rural area. The aim is to create, to give farmers the opportunity to sell directly, to support local areas, and to support organic farming. For example, also shared gardens in rural areas, but also in cities, roof gardens. This is what Europe does to support development in agriculture. So these pillars already exist. It is really important to focus on needs, local needs, because if you know what are the needs, you can create projects in forms of ecosystems with the producer, the middleman, and point of sale. So all this must be integrated. And as a result, the farmer and farmers can have a better living because they have less middlemen, and they can have access to consumers, and consumers also take benefit because they can buy from local producers in in their own region, and they can buy organic food. So this is a really important progress from social and economic point of view that is going to support organic farming. We can see that it is everywhere. Organic farming is really everywhere. But we need to make sure that there is a fair remuneration for that production, because big supermarkets are good, but it is perhaps not really the best solution, the best outlet for producers, because they can't get a fair remuneration. So it is a good idea to have organic food that is affordable for everyone, but it is also important that farmers can sell their products directly without a middleman. There is nothing new, because in the past there were things called markets, but in some cases, the producer would not be there personally. There are also cooperatives, a long tradition of cooperatives. And I think that this is the model that we should support with grants. Thanks a lot. Yes, and these products have a big impact on the environment, because if you have to import tomatoes from far away, they have to travel 200 kilometers. It means that there is also carbon footprint. So it is a virtuous circle. Everything is connected. Okay, we are going to change topic again. I think it is going to be the last question, because we have such a lot of, we almost finished our time. So one question about the means to stock energy, so batteries. They pollute a lot, because in order to produce those batteries, you use metals that are really much polluting. For example, also rare earths, sorry, that need to be important. How can you make sure that they are recycled? Well, it looks like if you solve a problem, you create another problem. Well, there is the model of circular economy. For example, you extend the life of a product. We know that the life of a product is calculated. Think about your mobile phone. When your mobile phone has a problem with the battery, you end up buying a new phone, because you could spend more money just by buying a battery. So it is really important to have the opportunity to fix the product. So the producer, the manufacturer, need to provide a plan and make sure that the different pieces of the product are available for a certain amount of time. We can see there are many more centers where you can fix the product that doesn't work. But the problem is that sometimes it is not easy. The pieces are not available, and this is part of the Green Deal. The second point is to minimize the use of rare earths in those products. At the moment, there is a really bad extraction method. It is not good for the environment when you extract rare earths. But the price of the raw material is really low. When you go to production centers, you can see gas being emitted all the time. It burns every time. And it is too expensive to keep that gas. They don't know what to do with this gas. So it is really important to internalize all the costs. The second point, the other point, is to have a replacement for those rare earths. And we need to find a fairer system for everyone. For example, in Latin America, the extraction method for some of these rare earths result in exploitations. For example, children who are forced to work, and we know that they have this has an impact on their health. This is the case in DRC, in Congo. Lots of problems in connection with corruption are really at the other extreme of the European model. So Europe cannot be complicit in such situations. That is why it's much better to internalize those productions. Then batteries. It's not really easy to repair batteries for electric vehicles. For example, when you buy an electric bike, the battery is integrated. And so it is not possible to repair it. They tell you immediately, straight away, it is not possible to repair, to fix the battery of your electric bike. So once again, it should be much better to have a battery that can be extracted and fixed. The battery today is integrated almost all the time. But if you have a modular battery that you can take out, it could be stolen. But it would be much better to have a battery that you can take out of your bike and repair. It should be included in the sale contract. It should be something that is imposed on producer, an obligation for the manufacturer. These rules should be imposed. These rules should be obligations, even if the industries are hesitant, are reluctant. So I think that a solution should be found to make sure that manufacturers produce bikes that can be repaired, whose batteries can be repaired. Thanks a lot. I think that is the end of the presentation and of our event. Thanks a lot for answering all our questions. I could spend hours discussing these topics. Thanks a lot on my behalf, and thanks a lot on behalf of everyone. And the floor to Claire now. Thanks a lot, Mr. Dumort, for accepting our invitation. Thanks a lot to all participants for taking part to this event. This is the final event of our program Discover Our Europe. We've been discussing for 3 days in English and French. Thanks a lot for being part of this event that should have been held in presence, but because of COVID, this was not possible, but we managed to hold it anyway. I'll see you again on the 7th of June in Hungary, because there will be another conference. Stay tuned, because I will keep you posted. If you want to have the presentation of Mr. Dumort, please write us an email. The document presented at the beginning. So I am going to write in the chat the email. Please, if you want to have the presentation, write us an email and we'll send it to you. I'm typing it right now. Here it is. Okay, so if you send us an email, we'll be able to send you the presentation. Thanks a lot again, and I wish you a wonderful evening, and I'll see you again in Hungary to speak about Europe again. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.